Hello, everyone. So nice to see people socially distant in the room, dressed very stylishly as John Carver arrives on cue.
Thank you. These are Bondi Beach shorts.
And for those who are on Zoom, I'm sorry we couldn't possibly turn the camera around to show you John Carver's attire, but it is more Queensland than Canberra, let me put it that way. So let me say good afternoon and welcome. Thank you, those of you online, and thank you, those of you in the room, for joining us for this year's Alumni Week ANU University House event. It's a tradition that in the best traditions of University House, we started just last year. And thanks to Ziba, head of alumni, who's in the room here, and her team for incorporating us into the program and giving us some space. While last year's event, as those who were there would recall, was entirely virtual, we've progressed this year to a hybrid event. And there's 20 or so of us here in the Menzies Library, and I'm not sure how many, because I can't see the list of how many are out there, but welcome to you all. And next year, of course, we plan to continue the tradition of an Alumni Week event, but we hope to do it in University House itself. And the reason we're here in the McDonald room of the Menzies Library is because we can see University House and admire the tarpaulins on the roof. And for those who are out there in Zoom land, we'll turn the camera that way when we finish the panel session, so you can see it too. There's still the best part of a year's repair work to do, as we can see by looking from here. But the good news is that work has begun. So for those I don't know, I'm Peter Kanowski. I'm Master of University House, and I welcome you all as good friends of University House. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we meet and on which University House and the ANU stand, the Ngunnawal, the Ngambri peoples, and I pay our respects to their elders, past and present. For those of you who aren't in Canberra, that Ngunnawal country is just now feeling the first autumn chill of the year, and I can almost see the ginkgos in the courtyard turning from here. I can imagine that they are. But here in the McDonald room, we've got the warm ambience of a panel devoted to University House in a range of ways, and we'll shortly hear from them. And we've got the warmth of a physically present but socially distant crowd, appropriately socially distant, COVID-safe crowd. And I'm sure out there in the Zoom room, as much as it's possible to sense it, we've got a lot of warmth as well. Want to acknowledge a couple of people around the room, and Evans, Deputy Masters here, John Richards, former Master, John Carver, former board member, and we've got a number of other board members, past and present, out there in the Zoom world as well. Nice to have you all here. So we're taking the opportunity today to reflect on what University House means for each of us, prompted by the reflections of a panel of women who have experienced University House in different ways and to some extent at different times. We might think of their stories that we're about to hear as vignettes of a much wider kaleidoscope of experiences around the room, the physical room, the Zoom room, people who aren't here, about their experiences of University House. The panel are Louise Moran in red in the middle, Claire Sheridan in cream, immediately to my right, and in her trademark black to the right, Chris Wallace. So to introduce each of the panellists briefly, Louise is a member of what we might call the founding family of University House. Her parents, Pat and Jean, were at the opening in 1954. We're going to see a little reminder video of that in a moment. Her father was the first bursar as well as a professor of statistics. That's quite a good combination, I reckon, in terms of managing University House finances. Louise's mother, Jean, was founder and stalwart of the Ladies' Drawing Room, and Louise herself graduated from ANU with a BA in what I can only imagine were the heady days of 1968. As Louise noted in the bio for today's event, University House has been part of her life for all of her life, including the early stages of her career in education, from which she's now gracefully retired. And in a very nice closing of the circle, Louise also engaged with the Ladies' Drawing Room for the last decade of its activities, taking on the convener's role and helping to bring that august group to a graceful close in 2018. So thank you for all of that commitment, Louise, and welcome. I'll introduce Claire and Chris too, just not to break up the flow, and then we'll come back to Louise. So Claire, sitting next to me, is a Senior Collections Advisor for ANU, and she observes that in that role, it's awoken a passion for her for mid-century furniture and design, and has engaged her with University House and its extraordinary collection. So I'm very grateful for that. Claire did mention to me the other day that she really liked orange kitchens as well. It gave me a slight concern for some of where we're headed with the refurbishment. And Claire's most recent contribution to University House recovery is through leading a team that toiled for many weeks in the closing quarter of last year to clear 68 years of detritus from the tunnel and adjacent storage rooms at University House. They are now splendidly bare and tidy, if only we could see them over there. Claudia Reppin was part of that team. She's here as well. And as one who visited occasionally during that time to take stock of the wreckage, both the physical wreckage and sometimes it felt like the human wreckage, I can only reiterate what a remarkable job that team did in clearing out all of that detritus and how much they deserved to drink at the end of it. But they recovered some valuable, interesting items. We'll hear more from that about Claire, from Claire, that are going to go on a permanent display when University House reopens. And you can see the sort of, future that having a BA and a BSc from ANU as recently as 2018 and 2019 prepares you for. So, thank you, Claire. And then the third member of our panel, Dr. Chris Wallace. Chris claims to have entirely missed University House as an undergraduate. Possibly that was fortunate for University House. I imagine she spent her time strategically in the Union Bar instead, nevertheless graduating with a BA in 1980. And Chris also asserts that she made up for that earlier absence in her time as a doctoral student when she frequented Fellows Garden for everything from work meetings to Friday afternoon drinks, and nevertheless again was awarded her PhD from ANU in 2015. In between those degrees, Chris became a political journalist and historian, and her doctoral thesis includes what she says is an authoritative account of Bob Hawke's infamous University House fish pond swim, and that is certainly something we need an authoritative account of. Between Chris and Jill Woodhouse, who's here, I'm sure we've got triangulation. You probably also know Chris for her other writing, including her recent book, How to Win an Election, which I think is a very topical focus right at the moment. So Chris has said, if you've seen her bio notes, that her dream is to live full-time in in a North Wing suite, should such an opportunity ever arise, which prompts me to observe that University House is indeed overdue for a second woman master. So each of our panellists will speak in the order that I've introduced.
You heard it, folks.
And then we'll have some time for reflections and questions from around the McDonald room and the Zoom room. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass the microphone to Louise, and we'll also got some visual entertainment to accompany Louise. Louise, thank you.
It's nice to take that off. Thank you very much for the invitation, Peter. It has caused me to go back over rather too many years, and I can see several people in this room who can also go back a long way in their experience of University House. So what I think I will do in a very short period of time, Peter, I know it's 10 minutes, is 3 vignettes, to use Peter's word. The first is, can we have we've got it. The opening of the house. The house opened when I was 5 3/4. The first master, Dale Trendle, did not believe that children should be either seen or heard, and certainly not in the house. And so I wasn't technically allowed in the house until I was 12. However, while the building was being built, we would come over and look at it and clamber in the bits that were relatively safe to clamber in. And my parents are somewhere in, that's the library from the look of it, but the opening itself, because my father was the first bursar, he dressed up in his very pretty red and gold robes. My mother dressed up in her extremely pretty outfit with a hat, as one did in 1954. And everybody rocked up, and the men in their robes formed a guard of honour for Prince Philip to go through what is now the front entrance and into the house. And as he got up those few steps to the front door, he, according to my father, turned round and looked at them all and said, "What a beautiful bunch of pansies." And my father never forgot it. Both my parents got very involved in the house from day one, as did pretty well everybody else within the university, because there was, in Canberra at that time, when we arrived in 52, there were 25,000 people. The place grew very rapidly. Canberra grew very rapidly thereafter. But there was very few places for social life other than in the home, and homes tended to be fairly small and not terribly well equipped for catering. So the house was designed very openly to be the heart of the university. It's wonderful that it has remained that ever since, even if it's currently closed. And therefore, the men who were the members of staff, with very few exceptions, except perhaps for Dr. Janine Joplin, who was a key figure in the house's history, and the wives of the members, who were all also invited to become members themselves. That is, of academic staff. There was quite a divide, unless you were a member of the senior administrative staff of the university. And it became the centre of social life for all of them. So for my father, it became the place he came for lunch for the next 35 years, including the Fellows' Garden for a very long time. But before that, if I'm right, Peter, what is now Boffin's was the bar. And he helped prop that up for many years, along with everybody else. My mother, on the other hand, was much more demure about such things. And she got very involved indeed with the ladies' drawing room. And I'd like to come back to that as my third vignette. I'd like now to fast forward to the early 70s, having completed my undergraduate degree over the other side of the university in the School of General Studies, as it was then, on University Avenue as it actually was then. I got a job in 1971 in the Centre for Continuing Education, which was just over the back of University House, roughly where Graduate House is now, one of the wooden buildings left over from the university, from the hospital admin. And while CCE did what all adult education groups have done for 100 and something years, run adult ed classes at night, under Chris Duke, who was the director, we got very involved indeed. In fact, almost all of our activity was to do with lifelong learning in the workplace. And so we engaged with industry, with government, with unions, including Bob Hawke, and the ACTU, and with professional associations, professional bodies, all sorts of people. We drew in academics from the ANU. We ran things that were brand new to Canberra, at least, if not to Australia, search conferences, intensive workshops, small group activities. And to do all of that, we needed somewhere for people to come and stay. And University House was ideal. And at the same time, University House was encountering, like the rest of the university, financial problems. Hasn't changed. But it meant that the house had to rethink how it operated and to become much more commercial in its activities. They hired Bill Torrance as the manager of the house, and Bill came with a background in hotel management, Swiss training, also training as a chef. And he transformed, with Peter Forrest, the deputy, he transformed the place over the next decade or more. And they saw us as an ideal source of income. And so for a couple of years, I virtually lived at University House, sometimes in very elegant circumstances, sometimes in a student room in A block. And we used every week. We would have plenary sessions and dinners in the Great Hall, occasionally in the common room, never in the library, you'll be pleased to know. But we used the Scarth room, we used the, I don't know if there still is, but there was a common room down at the bottom of A block for students. We used what is now the Torrance room and the other room next to it onto the courtyard, and we used the ladies' drawing room. So that was my first direct connection with the drawing room, where one very, very, very late evening, I sat out Bob Hawke, who had come for an industrial relations conference that we organised. We did not tell the master that he was coming, and he was still technically persona non grata. So he snuck in, he drank a lot of beer and would not bloody well go. And so I had to sit there until he did eventually disappear. But so that was my experience of Bob Hawke and University House. I then left Canberra and pursued my own career in universities over a long time, and stayed a member of the house because of the reciprocal arrangements, which no doubt a lot of you have used too, with faculty clubs and clubs elsewhere, particularly for me in Canada. I went and did my PhD at the University of British Columbia in the late 80s, and was able to use my membership at University House to join the UBC faculty club, which was not available to postgraduate students. You could only enter that august place if you were a member.
I probably thought you were a bit like Bob Hawke.
And I got into terrible strife from the professor in my department once when I took 2 other postgrad students in for lunch, and he accosted me, and so I pulled out my member. I was very pleased. Thank you, University House, for that. My third vignette is probably the reason that Peter invited me in the first place, and that is the ladies' drawing room. Nowadays, we know it as the drawing room. To me, it is the ladies' drawing room. From the very beginning, Keith Hancock persuaded the governing body of the house that there should be a room dedicated to use by the ladies, i.e. the wives, which was prescient and almost certainly a result of his wife putting the hard word on him. But it happened, and so the ladies' drawing room was a huge success from day one. Women came, brought their own sandwiches, their own coffee and tea, used that little kitchen, which is no longer really adequate, but it was ideal at the time. And they had all sorts of social events there, and started what to my mind is one of the most important but very rarely seen things about the university, and that is they created the communities, the social communities, the friendships, the relationships, not simply within departments which you could build through tea rooms and people moving outside their labs or their offices, but across the research schools, and then later on with people from CSIRO and from senior echelons of the public service and, God help us, ANU graduates, and who had become respectable by the time they graduated. And that group has always been not only the physical room itself, but the group of women who were the original pioneers of the university. The university went through a phase of having pioneers, some of you might remember. And my parents were in that generation, and I guess I'm in the next lot, along with Jill Waterhouse and various others. And the drawing room eventually settled into a series of luncheons, never a lunch, always a luncheon with a speaker. And there would be 8 or 9, 10 of them, John, a year. And the people who spoke at those, let me just hastily get my notes, were many and very, sorry, Chris, well done, were many and varied. They included every Vice-Chancellor, who was trotted out at some point. They included every master from Ralph Elliott onwards. Dale Trendle had obviously missed out. And they included quite a number of members of the drawing room itself, because the women who came to Canberra in the early 50s were women who almost all could not work because they were married and etc. But there were very many of them, women with professional lives and backgrounds and expertise of their own, of great diversity of interest and knowledge. And they had very much to offer to each other and to the university in general. So some of the people who spoke at those luncheons included Rosalie Gascoigne several times on her artwork, but also on Ikebana. She was an expert in Ikebana. And at one point, an unfortunate, to be unnamed master asked the ladies' drawing room if they would please do all the flowers for the house.
Wasn't me.
No, it's not for your tactic. But the ladies agreed. The ladies agreed for a while, and Rosalie got her daughter Hester, who lasted 5 weeks, and then skived off to Sydney, and Rosalie took it over. So for a short period, the house was chock-a-block full of serious Ikebana decorations. And then the ladies just decided to, well, actually Rosalie, I think, decided that was enough and that they could look after it from there. But flowers became and have remained a very important motif in the drawing room. Yes, Peter. But the speakers have included people like Nugget Coombs, Ruth Dobson, Penny Wensley talking about diplomatic life, Jeff Pryor on cartooning, and pretty well everything in between. So it wasn't a high-powered event, but it was an event that women absolutely loved and came to, and the occasional man turned up. The masters usually came, which was lovely, and along with them, the speaker, but that was about it. By the 1980s, however, numbers declined and it sort of went on from there. Women like my generation were working, we couldn't do lunchtime functions much. And we also had other means of making friendships, but the lifelong friendships continued. In 2023, they decided to close up shop, but John Richards and his wife Glenda decided that wasn't good enough, and so they kept it going for another 12 years or more, and Glenda was absolutely indefatigable in making it happen. And when Peter arrived, he very dutifully was persuaded by Glenda and later me to continue the tradition. And we ultimately, as Peter says, closed up shop in 2018, by which time, and I can see one member of the drawing room here today, but by that stage, we really did need to retire gracefully, I think. And it was a remarkable experience. It was a remarkable part of the university, which very few people know. So I'm really glad to have had the opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Louise. And there's a lot more that could be said. Thanks for keeping it to 20 minutes. I think, you know, any of us who've had any connection with the ladies' drawing room and personalities in that appreciate just how valuable that was. Thank you for bringing that to the table. Going to come to a different focus now, and that's the work that Claire has been doing and her perspectives on University House collections. I'll pass the microphone. I've got to slide my chair back out of the camera.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for having me here today. I must say I didn't have much to do with University House when I was a student here. But the minute I started working here in ANU Heritage with Amy Jarvis, and since becoming Senior Collections Advisor, this has been the, sorry, I'm taking my mask off. This has been the one of the highlights of my role. And I must say, clearing out the nuclear shelter underneath the University House was definitely one of the more interesting parts of my role, if not a little bit unexpected. So as, you know, I have some images up there. So as Peter said, I put together a team which includes Claudia Reppin, who's here today, and Polly Prakash, and he's at the back, he's also here, and Peter Shen, who very much helped me basically pull out 60 odd years worth of stuff, for want of a better word, that had accumulated in the tunnels. Next slide. Thank you. So the aim of this project was basically to give you some context. The rest of University House had already been cleared and material had gone into storage. And someone from Facilities and Services popped by my desk to tell me that we had missed a little bit, and I needed to follow him into the tunnel so that he could show me how much stuff was left over. So our goal was to sort and inventory and then store this material so that it could be used in different ways once the building reopened. So I put up a few different categories that we had to deal with. The two priorities are primarily the archival material, which includes things like the original building plans, as well as some wonderful documents from University House's history, which I will get to later, and the Fred Ward furniture collection. We also had heritage furnishings, such as original light fittings, what we've termed heritage memorabilia, which essentially is the really amazing objects we found while we were down there and decided to make a collection out of. Workshop tools and equipment. This was an active maintenance space. We also had University House equipment to do with the running of the hotel and of functions and events, as well as a lot of rubbish, for want of better words. Next one. Thank you. So to give a bit of context, and I'm sorry for the people who are on Zoom and can't see me pointing, but this is the lower ground level floor plan of University House. So the front of the building is here, and that's off Balmain Crescent. I'm just going to get up, sorry, I'm losing up the camera. You would enter University House, walk all the way down to the spiral staircase, go to a very nondescript door, which is a fire exit, and that would be the entrance to the tunnels. And so the tunnels basically run underneath the entire building. It's a bit like a donut, you can walk all the way around. And along the outer edge are a number of storerooms and workshops, which were filled to the brim, floor to ceiling. You couldn't possibly fit another object in there, even if you tried. And all along the actual tunnel walkway as well was a significant amount of material. So this is what the tunnels look like as you're walking through. Very dark, a little creepy. A majority of the time you have to crouch, I would say, for 80% of it. And so this posed a lot of problems in terms of actually being able to put a team down there to work. The project was supposed to go, or did go, for 4 weeks. The first week was about scoping, sorting, figuring out what we wanted to do and figuring out a plan of action. Week 2 to week 4, we were supposed to have removalists to actually help us take every single thing out of the building and take it to Mitchell, which is where our storage warehouse is. That didn't quite go to plan, unfortunately. We ended up getting a second round of asbestos testing done, being very responsible, but it blew out our timelines. So of those 3 weeks we were supposed to have removalists, we had removalists for 4 days, which meant our team of 4 actually moved everything. And it was, I would say, the hardest I've ever worked in my entire life. But it was fantastic. It was a really great team. We just got stuck down to and got to work. And we accomplished a lot, as you're about to see. Thank you. So this is one of the rooms that are off the tunnel. This was what the maintenance office, is that correct, Peter?
Well, I was never allowed in there, so. Jill said
Secret
yes.
office. And if you see,
It was Peter Forrest's office.
there you go.
Back in the
There you go.
70s.
Well, we love this office. We had a lot of fun here. Behind the print on the wall is actually a secret door, which leads, if you go to the next photo, leads to this storeroom, which was also filled to the brim. You couldn't walk into it. We had to take the door off in order to start actually pulling stuff out. But this is where we found a majority of the incredible objects that have formed part of the memorabilia collection. But it gives some context. This was a couple of hours into work, I might say. This wasn't as bad as when we first got in there. But it shows, I guess, kind of what we were dealing with. There was a lot of sorting to be done. Nothing had really moved. It was kind of a bit like a ghost town. So the minute University House closed, it was kind of like that pens down, everyone left approach and everything was exactly as it was. So it was a bit eerie to be down there. Next slide. This is probably a better photo to show what the rooms looked like. So this was one of the workshops that we were dealing with. That this took us, or us, I say us, this took Claudia and Curtis a considerable amount of time to clear and sort. But it was a lot of fun, and it was, I must say, I trained as an archaeologist, and same skills were applied, funnily enough. It was very interesting to look at University House's history through the lens of what was sort of discarded in the tunnels. So next slide. Thank you. And a huge part of my job is opening random cupboards and doors at the university to see what we have kept for the last 30 odd years, if not longer. In our last week, I made the mistake of opening a door that I had somehow forgotten about and ignored for the previous weeks in the project. And we found just rows and rows of receipts that poor Polly and Curtis had to then go through and move. And we all nearly cried when I opened that door, so it was a bit of a shame. Next slide. So unfortunately, I don't have very good before photos that gave the context of how much stuff was in there. But this is what it now looks like, those tunnel rooms. On the left here was entirely filled with thread wood furniture, some stunning pieces that I cannot wait to be reused back in the building, and they are now in storage, ready for Claudia and I to start cataloguing it and building off the work that Meredith did some years ago. Some of these were workshop rooms again, which, you know, added to the hazards. There was a lot of chemicals and paint fumes and other such materials that we really had to be careful when we walked and were working around. But we have a great team at ANU who were more than happy to help us out with this. Next slide.
Any wine?
Unfortunately, no. So one of the joys, I guess, of working with a heritage building is, in the case of University House, off this side actually, where Molly Huxley building is, you can't actually get a removalist truck underneath the into it in order to get rubbish and furniture out of there. So it actually became this process where our team ferry rubbish in these wheelie skips that you can see to the other side of the building where the skip bin was. And our poor removalists had to ferry furniture out on the back of utes and in vans and then repack it from the ute into a truck in order to move it. So it was a very long process. But they also, I think, worked harder than I've ever seen. So we were very fortunate. Right. Thank you. So yeah, as we can see, we had a lot of fun. The fire brigade got called, which we panicked about, thinking we'd set something off in the tunnels, but it turns out it was a possum. So it wasn't us, which was a relief. But they were very confused as to why we were in the tunnels. We also scared a good number of people who were there to do maintenance work, and Claudia and I just kept popping up out of the tunnels at random points. We made a lot of grown men very, very scared. So that was quite entertaining. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I suppose the interesting part is what we actually found. Next slide. So as I said, a lot of fretboard furniture, which Claudia and myself, who manage the historic furniture collection as well, the broader furniture collection at ANU, we got very excited about. We think there's potentially some original Enclate upholstery on one or two of the chairs, which is very exciting. We haven't seen that before. So we, as I said, this is kind of the start of the next process. We now have to catalogue all of those pieces and come up with a plan with Peter as to what we do next. A lot of architectural drawings, which are going to be extremely useful for the architects in redoing University House. So we were very happy we found those. Hundreds and hundreds of records of German orchestral music. So if anyone is interested in having some, please let me know.
Kurt Mahler, Professor Kurt Mahler.
Right, there we go.
Mathematics.
There we go.
He lived in the house for decades.
Yeah, that explains it, Claudia. We were wondering. We found a voting paper slip and envelope for the University House election, which is now part of the memorabilia collection. We thought it was quite cool. A billiards box and a croquet set, which we thought University House could use during events in the courtyard, which would be quite fun. Plaques and shields from other universities, clearly for events and things like that. An engine block, which is somehow someone managed to carry it into the tunnel and put it in the most inconvenient place that we then had to carry out. But it was a Ford engine block, so that was quite interesting. And then a ton of historical furnishings that we inventoried and are hoping that we will use them in the new building. Next slide. We add some images next. So there's our engine block. This is kind of one of the alcoves of the tunnels that, as you can see, is just filled with the random things. Next, thank you. Some of my favorite things. We found a calligraph typewriter, which Claudia dated to about 1880, 1890. And the cover in fairly decent condition, actually. So we're hoping that will go on display. We don't quite know how it got to the tunnels of University House, so still some research to do. We found the Addressograph Graphotype 350, which, let me tell you, was exceptionally heavy to move. Next slide. Probably one of my favorite ones was we found this Nippon type, which essentially is a Japanese typewriter. And it came with 2,500 what they call slugs with Japanese characters on it, which was also very painful to move, but very lovely. So we're hoping we'll be able to display that as well. Next. These fabulous 1970s electric kettles, which we have many of, if anyone would like one too. We saved a couple for the memorabilia collection, but we are drowning in these kettles. So if you would like one, please let me know. Yes, please. Thank you. So yes, it was a wonderful project. We were very glad to have done it, and we now have a lot, I guess, to think about in terms of display, future display, whether it be virtual or physical in University House moving forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. You can see why Claire's just the great person to be the collections officer for the university. And I guess, in retrospect, quite present timing that we cleared out the nuclear bunker just in time for the invasion of Ukraine. It's ironic to think about, that being built in the shadow of the Cold War. And here we are in 2022. Thank you very much, Claire. Let me pass to our third panellist, Dr. Chris Wallace.
Thanks, Peter. Wow, yes, here we are, University House. People and places, that's our entire life, right? People and places. And the people we meet and don't meet are so often dictated by the places we do and don't find. Peter's right, I'm a late comer to University House. I spent an entire undergraduate degree here not knowing it existed. And if there's a more siloed place than a university, I don't know what it is. At that time, of course, it was pre the Chubb reforms, which melded the old undergraduate faculty side of the university and the research schools. I'm not so certain about the wisdom of that decision then or since, but let's just park that. The original arrangement of ANU into a strictly divided undergraduate versus postgraduate parts of the university was physically delimited, as well as a matter of practical employment for people who worked here and people who studied here. The graduate, postgraduate side of the university, the research schools had literally nothing to do with the faculties. Even physically, we would not cross campus at all. We had in my entire undergraduate degree, I had no reason to come to the side of the campus at all, and didn't. There was one brief exception, Peter, to my statement that I was a latecomer, and that is the graduation cup of tea afterwards was at University House. It was a wintry day, it was brief, it was full of people, there was no kind of ability to get a sense of it. And it wasn't until 32 years after I'd originally turned up at ANU and 29 years after I left it that I actually discovered and made one of the, the great relationships of my life that just happened to be with a building, not a person. For those who might be listening online who haven't experienced University House or who are here since the hail damage to the house shut it down so tragically a couple of years ago, if you haven't experienced University House, you really missed out. It is indescribable to be in this stunning modernist building in which the lived experience for decades has been one of phenomenal intellectual discovery, deep collegiality, and extraordinary fun. And I think had I discovered it as an undergraduate, which I might have post-Chubb reforms, although I'm still not sure, I think my life would have possibly taken a different trajectory. So I'm sorry I came late, but by God, I'm glad I came because it is an amazing place in so many respects. So this love affair started, in fact, in this room. In 2009, I was thinking about doing a PhD here in the School of History, and there was a seminar on, and I thought I'd come over and kind of check out the history academics. The history seminar was held in this room, the McDonald room of the Menzies Library. I sat here, I looked across to University House and had some vague memory of that cup of tea after graduating decades earlier. And it turned out that for 50 years, the ANU history seminar had met in this room weekly during term time, and then, like goats, followed the track over to what was by then Fellows Bar in University House. This is, for an historian, this was an amazing discovery, an incredible kind of artifact of earlier eras at ANU, and I, with great fascination followed, very like the procession of academics and postgraduate students who went over to University House for a post-seminar drink and found an extraordinary group of people who were part of a continuing living tradition at ANU that I did not know about, and probably no one outside the School of History at ANU knew about either, or still doesn't. The building itself cannot help but stimulate the most wonderful life impulses for human interaction, for the exchange of thinking. the spaces are not only beautiful, but open yet nurturing. It's an absolute masterclass in the way that, you know, as Churchill once said, we make buildings, thereafter they make us. It's a place where extraordinary things have happened and continue to happen because of the way it shapes human interaction. It's really quite something. And there has been grief, actual grief, amongst people who are used to spending parts of their weekly lives in Fellows Garden, having a drink, or in one of the seminar rooms, or bringing friends in from interstate to stay there. In so many ways, it's woven deeply into our lives. That, in fact, points to a better way of living. And it's fascinating how the collegiate origins of a place like University House, which are deep in the kind of monastic traditions of Oxbridge, on which a university like this is essentially modelled, and still runs along the lines of, in fact, in many remarkable ways. That way of living together with minimal personal space, shared hospitality spaces, and different pockets of ways of interacting is an absolute pointer to the future for other ways of living, a pointer from the past that if we were wiser as a community, we would grasp and really do something with. The grief about University House being shut down for the last couple of years because of the hail damage doesn't just rip Canberrans. There are people all around Australia who go, when is it opening? When's it opening? It's like, please get on with that, the repairs. And of course, as Claire points out, they're extremely sensitive repairs, and it's necessary that it takes time. Though the insurance deal could be a lot faster, done a lot faster. But you know, one of my mates, for example, at Albany, Dr. Sybil Nolan, loves it. Cannot wait to get back. This is not the usual feeling of people for buildings, but it is how we feel about University House. So, Peter, as the current custodian, I've got to say the people part of people and places is very important. And we're so glad you're the steward of bringing it back to life. You bring your own contemporary take on how the building lives in this current era. You've got the continuing rigour, you've got a great warmth and very Australian informality about how you bring together the very large number of postgraduates that remain under the wing of University House and its twin graduate house next door. You're a great hospo fellow, you know, very good at the hospitality. You run a really good hall dinner. And I think you've got a great kind of generosity of spirit about you that is actually part of the history of the building. And I only regret that, you know, should you appear in Dark Alley anytime soon, ditto Deputy Master Anne Evans, I don't want to have to run down more than two of you. So if anyone else who has any ideas about succeeding you, please make yourself known so I can take care of it in the future. But really, the Master of University House is, I think, the best job in Canberra. Gives you enormous scope for doing good with an incredibly rich community of extraordinarily well-motivated people. Long may it rain. Bring on the opening. Please end the pining, end our pining and name the opening day so that the love affair can continue.
Thanks so much, Chris. I think that's speaking from the heart for so many people who are associated with University House. Well, as reminding them us what they should be up to. And, you know, I'm reminded by your reflections of that program. My sister, who works at the ABC, the famous Kanowski Sarah, interviewed a woman who had married a bridge, and, you know, in Spain. It's an interesting concept, but, you know, I think you're speaking to the affection for the building is one that actually is widely shared because it is so beautifully designed and so easy to appreciate, even more so now that it's so clean. The idea was that we have a bit of time for discussion. We've got 3 minutes for the officially scheduled hour. I'm going to privilege people who might be on Zoom if there's anything they'd like to put into the chat there. have the panel respond to, or any reflections that they'd like to contribute, into the chat, we can relay those here and respond, because those of us who are in the room are going to benefit from University House chef's team lunch once we finish the panel. We have a little bit of time, so let me just look there in the Zoom room. It's a webinar format, which people are probably familiar with, which means you can only type, not speak, right? But that's consistent with the monastic tradition, isn't it, Chris? So that's okay. Nothing yet. Anything in the room that people would like to flag? Roman.
Yes, I've got a question. A very senior member of this university, no longer with us, told me that when you arrived here in Canberra in the late 50s, University House was the only place you could eat. Yeah. Was there a feeling staff members in those early years at Canberra was a bit of a hardship post?
So let me just paraphrase the question Louise is going to respond to. Roman was asking, relaying the recollection of early era staff members eating at the University House because there was nowhere else.
Yeah, it's true. There wasn't anywhere else. There was places like the Hotel Canberra, but they were residential for the likes of Menzies and politicians and so on. The Charcoal Grill started, the restaurant on Red Hill started, but they were early 60s. They were where a boy took you for dinner if he was really whining and dining you and had the money. There was very little, and it probably was a hardship post for quite a lot. My own experience is that and it's simply the personalities of my parents, that they took to it with huge gusto, and so did most of the people who became their good friends. But there was also very little in the way of housing. So when the Honans arrived, Ross Honan was the university secretary, he couldn't bring his family to Canberra for quite a long time because there was simply nowhere for them to live. My parents said that they only had 2 houses that they could look at to buy, and all the other housing was for the government people.
Well, still only 2 houses to buy in Canberra.
Well, it hasn't improved much, but we chose the right one. We had it for 60-something years. But it probably was a hardship post for quite a lot of people. They were young, most of them. They were in their 30s and 40s. They had small children. There was, this hasn't changed much either, there was very little in the way of public transport. The husband would take the car and go to work, or a bicycle. But so the women were very isolated, and that really didn't help. And it wasn't easy to buy things because there wasn't very much in the way of shops. So, for somebody who was used to a big city, that must have been pretty hard.
Thanks. Lucky you got through it, Louise. Any other comments or questions? David Williams.
I do regular sculpture walks around the campus, and one of my starting points has always been University House. What a pity you haven't been able to do that in recent time. But somewhere in the responses, I noted that with the collection of art and sculpture which started at the university, it was thought that at University House might represent really a museum or a gallery for the community. And I think probably to a very large extent that still continues. So I think I want to let the occasion go without mentioning the art collection, which is very substantial. And I think I always warmly enjoy it wonderfully. It's wonderful to present our visitors to University House. I always start there and continue on. So well done, University House.
Thanks, David, and thanks to you and others in the art community who have both contributed to that being the case and continue to ensure that people are aware of and can benefit from that. And I think that's also part of the grief that Chris was referring to, is the sort of loss of access to some of those pieces of of artwork that are quite defining, defining in some of the spaces of University House, internally and externally. And yeah, I guess it's prompting me, your comments prompting me to think about, you know, the sort of quiet space that University House presents at the right time of day, that I think is really quite special. Did you want to comment?
Just to add a little to your comment, David, the other great thing about it is the sense of just living with art instead of being a referential experience. And in that sense, kind of has shown many Australians, I think, that that art is not to be worshipped, it's to be lived with and lived. And one of my warmest recollections, it sounds silly, I know, but I used to love walking past the stacked up fretboard trestle tables and thinking, oh my God, it must be worth an absolute fortune. Aren't they gorgeous? Oh my God, they're jumbled up in this pile that would double up. You know, the just living with art is such a beautiful part of the University House experience. And when's it coming back, Peter?
The tables, the tables. Yeah. I mean, again, people who've worked at University House and had some association with the working of University House would appreciate that has been one of the challenges, is that in the more multifunctional use of spaces, so the hall being used in the way that Louise was talking about, I guess, from CCE days onwards, much of that furniture has to be moved, and it wasn't really designed to be moved in the way that it is. So that's one of our challenges in coming back into University House, is you know, complying with contemporary WHS rules while still having that furniture to appreciate. So as Claire alluded to, we've got some creative thinking to do about how we strike that balance. I'm looking at the clock and recognising, particularly for those online who might do something else, we should probably wrap up the formalities fairly soon, but is there anything else anybody in the room would like to say at the moment? I've got a few closing remarks. Maybe I'll come to those, and then we could just continue the discussion in the room informally, and thank those who are outside the room. You know, when I thought about assembling a panel of people who would give complementary perspectives on University House, I thought of 3 people sitting next to me, and thank you, Louise, Claire, Chris, for doing such a wonderful job of those, you know, perspectives on different elements of University House. And I think that's part of our story, is we've all got those different perspectives. And I think that, you know, and David's comment about the art as another example, it reminds us of the many ways in which University House connects to the university community and to the wider Canberra community. And Chris, you're so right that so many people, not just, you know, who work on campus, but who come to Canberra from elsewhere, feel that sense of loss. So on that front, the repair work is progressing, though we can't see much evidence of that from outside yet. Hindmarsh, who are managing the work, have been working through the detailed planning. Christine Allard, who's one of our board members and is here, has been bringing her experience as a former director of facilities and services to bear and helping us engage with that process. They've, you know, all the usual things have happened. They found asbestos in one of the ceilings has to be removed. The, you know, extended period in 2 La Nina years has meant that the whole top floor ceilings and has to be replaced completely, which is, you know, in the broad scheme of things, a good thing, but we'll add a bit of time to that, as well as cost. And I reckon that they're also secretly preparing to get a sort of fleet of trucks to drive down the Academy of Science one dark night and take the copper off the new copper off the roof there and bring it up the hill, because apparently the war in Ukraine has done terrible things to copper supply, which, you know, for those who know about how copper gets used, probably not a very happy story. But there are some, you know, practical challenges like that. Lovell Chen, who are heritage architects based in Melbourne, and their team are redesigning the kitchen. So it'll be much more functional, and that's great news. We're going to make it a multifunctional kitchen and shift the Boffin's kitchen back inside to the main kitchen space. And we're also trying to redesign fellows, which, you know, as John Richards, who's here, knows, is a sort of ongoing challenge to make that basement space that fellows occupies functional, given that it props the building up as well, so you can't move too many of the posts. And we're also, you know, in the process of doing all that, working out how we're going to pay for those costs that are above the insurance costs, that would just make the building, you know, bring the building back to as it was. And we're still working towards opening the public rooms early next year, and embellishing them and other parts of University House with the assistance of contributions that many of you in this room and on the Zoom room and who aren't here have made or promised to the Friends of University House Fund. So let me say heartfelt thanks to you all for that. On that cheerful note, those of us in the McDonald room can look across, to my right, and we can look forward to the work of the next year in restoring University House to its former glory, so that we can again join that in person. We're going to turn the camera that way in a minute so people in the Zoom room can see it. So thanks very much, people here and on Zoom, for joining this Alumni Week event. Thanks very much for your continuing support for University House in so many ways. We're all the better for it, and the university community is the better for it. Before we break, I want to thank the advancement and alumni teams who made today possible. Gwen and Nicole behind me here, James down the back and others. Zeba had to go, I think. But thanks to the University House team and Polyheads, as well as cleaning out the tunnel. Polly's keeping University House on the road. Thank you, Polly. And they've made lunch that we'll enjoy. So we'll do that. Thanks to you in the Zoom room for joining. I hope you have a nice lunch too, whatever you're having. I'm looking forward to having lunch with those who are in the room here. Thanks very much. Look forward to continuing the conversation prompted by Louise, Claire and Chris. Please join me in thanking them.